Welcome, everybody. I'm going to be coming back and saying a few things in just a minute, but we have a whole good group of people with us, and I want to introduce, first of all, one of the people who was most instrumental in getting us started in this process, and that is Senator Anthony Williams, State Senate. And I hope, Senator Williams, are you on, and can you start right now?
I am on, and I can hear you. Thank you, Governor.
Good. I'd like to welcome you. Thank you, Tony. Good to have you with us.
Thank you so much. And I want to first start with what should be obvious to all of us. I'm appreciative of the governor and his staff for receiving the several calls from me on behalf of residents of Pennsylvania, and particularly those in the Eastwick and Derby area who've been overrun and are just tired, emotionally tired and drained from the consequence of climate change. I want to thank the governor for his leadership and attention to this growing issue. To the residents of Eastwick, Derby, and other flood-prone locations across the Commonwealth. And I want to underscore other flood-prone areas across the Commonwealth. Today is an important first step in ensuring that our homes and our businesses are safe from the growing threat of climate change. As severe weather escalates, we must all work together to proactively prevent the type of widespread damage seen in Eastwick this past summer and to prepare for our communities to respond appropriately when it happens. Pennsylvania has seen a 10% increase in precipitation over the last 50 years, and by 2050, precipitation will be 8% higher than it is now. For many parts of the Commonwealth, 2018 was the wettest year on record, with heavy rains demonstrating vividly and tragically that our flood mitigation planning and infrastructure has not kept up with the changing precipitation patterns. Short durations, high-intensity precipitation events have increased throughout the Commonwealth. These events result in significant damage that are localized with lengthy recovery periods. Due to the short duration, the damage from these events rarely reach the threshold for the Commonwealth to request federal assistance disaster for those residents who are most affected, leaving that responsibility to homeowners who no longer have the wherewithal to maintain the insurance, or if they do, the ability to recover what they've lost. And with this, the governor and his administration today, along with others, will talk about the plans going forward. Pennsylvania's legacy infrastructure was designed for the precipitation events of decades ago and has been inadequately maintained. Our infrastructure must be updated to handle the changing weather patterns and new development. Major rehabilitations to Pennsylvania's 120 flood control facilities are the responsibility of the Commonwealth. Only 68 of these facilities meet the eligibility criteria established by the Army Corps of Engineers Emergency Rehabilitation Program. The rest are ineligible for rehabilitation coverage under this program. Costly repairs to these facilities after flood events will be borne by the sponsor municipalities and the Commonwealth. Areas of the state that are developed need proper stormwater management to divert rain from overflowing sewers, which can flood streets, lawns, and homes, to soil for infiltration and groundwater regeneration. A substantial investment is needed in these communities. Again, I want to thank the governor for his attention, his responsible action, and the activities of his staff to bring us here today. And with that, I'll turn it over to my friend, our leader, Representative Joanna McClinton.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Senator Williams, for your hard work for our combined neighbors in Eastwick, Southwest Philly, Delaware County, but for our folks across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, it is not unusual because of climate change for our neighbors to be facing some of the most strange weather patterns and weather situations. Just 2 days ago, we had severe tornado warnings and thunderstorms happening at the same time that were not just an issue in southeastern Pennsylvania, but were even happening at the same time in southern New Jersey and in Delaware. So we don't just get alerts, but what happens when these events occur is people's homes are damaged, people's businesses are damaged, I was very glad to welcome Governor Wolf to the 191st District, to Darby Borough, just about 2 years ago now, when we had terrible flooding and the entire town was just about underwater, to see the damage and to see the types of things that we need to put in place infrastructure-wise, not just in Darby Borough, not just in Southwest Philly, but in neighborhoods across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, communities that are facing these issues and unable and not equipped to be able to do them by themselves. Now, it's unfortunate and a shame that my colleagues did not act on the governor's Restore PA plan, because that would have called for common sense, a severance tax to pay for these safety protocols like flood mitigation plans, and make sure that flood walls are established and developed so that homes are no longer always compromised when something happens, and to make sure that there's a real Pennsylvania Disaster Relief Fund for homeowners and for small business owners who are affected by this perpetual flooding that we have seen in our district. But I look forward to working on these issues going into the next legislative session as the new House Democratic leader with our governor. And with that, I'm happy to welcome to the stage, of course, to his very own platform there, Governor Wolf. Thank you for all of your hard work. I'm happy to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Representative McClinton, and actually Leader-elect McClinton. I really am looking forward to working with you. You have been a great representative, and I know we can do some great things here. And Senator Williams, thank you for your comments, and thank you for bringing this to the attention of all of us in the administration. This is something that we need. We have many of us been talking about this for a long time. And as Leader McClinton pointed out, Restore Pennsylvania was actually guided by this kind of problem happening all over Pennsylvania, rural and urban areas, all over the Commonwealth. And it's high time that we do something about it. We still don't have Restore Pennsylvania. We still don't have the massive funding that we could have gotten from that. But we do have some things in place, some institutions, and that's what I want to talk about here. We need to get started as quickly as possible addressing the global climate crisis. It's one of the most important challenges that we face all across the world, but here in Pennsylvania. And even as we continue to work on the mitigation of the spread of COVID-19, we cannot cannot ignore the responsibility we have for addressing the issue of climate change. The dangers brought on by climate change, as both Senator Williams and Leader McClinton mentioned, are endangering lives, livelihoods, and communities all across the Commonwealth. Climate change has brought new challenges to all of us, and that includes placing an unprecedented strain on our infrastructure and on our hazard mitigation plans. Pennsylvania communities are struggling to deal with dangers and damages that historically have been really rare, but they're not rare anymore. In some places, this means an extended and more dangerous wildfire season in areas that have historically been protected by snow cover. In other places, it means short duration but intense rains that lead to flooding in communities that have not historically been prone to flood damage. While federal funding does exist to assist in disaster recovery efforts, certain thresholds have to be reached before the Commonwealth can request financial aid from the federal government. And given these short duration storms and the localized nature caused by climate change, this has been really difficult to do. Short but intense rainstorms like the ones we've discussed today can have devastating long-term effects on the community, but they fail in many cases to reach thresholds for federal aid because they only last a short time. This can leave municipalities, it can leave the state struggling to cover millions of dollars of recovery costs without any aid from the federal government. Back in 2018, for example, more than 5,000 homes were damaged in a series of incidents, but no single incident met the federal threshold. And that year alone left us with approximately $63 million in public infrastructure damages that were not reimbursable through any federal disaster program. These storms are only becoming more frequent. They're not going to go away. We hear the residents of Eastwick community that Senator Williams and Joanna McClinton talked about, and individuals in communities all across Pennsylvania, again, rural and urban, who are facing similar issues. In order to protect Pennsylvania communities, we need to change our approach to hazard mitigation and to regional planning. First, we must update our hazard mitigation plans to account for changing weather patterns and new development that's taking place all across the Commonwealth. We also have to update our infrastructure. I think as Leader McClinton pointed out, in the area that I toured with her and with Senator Williams, they were facing problems that are occurring right now and tried to deal with those problems with infrastructure that was actually put into place back in the 1920s. Well, that's just not going to work anymore. The world has changed dramatically. Our climate has changed dramatically. So that much of the critical infrastructure that was designed and constructed decades ago, that doesn't meet the needs of our climate today. We need to take immediate steps to mitigate these dangers. We need to take immediate steps to protect Pennsylvanians. Otherwise, we're only going to see more danger every year to homes, to businesses, to people. And that's just going to increase year after year if we do nothing. So I want to be at the forefront of the fight to mitigate this, including by setting Pennsylvania's first statewide climate goals, which I did with the aim of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 26% by 2025, just 5 years, and by 80% by 2050 compared to 2005 levels. It's important that we take concrete steps to achieve these goals, which is why I directed the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection to develop rulemaking to allow Pennsylvania to join the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. It's also one of the reasons why I proposed the Restore Pennsylvania plan back in 2018 to fund critical infrastructure projects throughout the Commonwealth, projects that desperately need to be funded that have not been funded either by the federal government or by the state government. A portion of the Restore Pennsylvania funds would have been directed toward flood mitigation and other critical infrastructure improvements. Unfortunately, we have not seen any action in the General Assembly to pass Restore or any other comparable infrastructure improvement plans. And again, these are issues and challenges that face municipalities all across the Commonwealth, rural and urban, Republican and Democratic. Therefore, in order to protect Pennsylvanians and mitigate the worsening dangers of climate change, I'm announcing 3 steps that my administration can take right now and will take right now to help Pennsylvania communities improve hazard mitigation planning and to protect their residents. It's not Restore Pennsylvania, but it's the best we can do right now. First, I'm going to charge the State Planning Board. The State Planning Board, which exists, has been in existence for some time, with developing a series of recommendations and best practices relative to land use, to planning, zoning, and stormwater management, with an emphasis on reducing the incidence of flash flooding that impacts residents and affects residents and businesses all across the Commonwealth. That's the first thing. Second, I'm going to charge the State Planning Board with establishing state goals and strategic investment principles regarding infrastructure and hazard mitigation planning. Third, I'm going to institutionalize state goals. All of us will institutionalize state goals and strategic investment principles across all state agency funding programs. We ought to be working together to make sure that we're not, again, working at cross purposes when we talk about how we're going to build a new highway or build new pipes. We want to make sure that we're actually addressing the most pressing problems facing Pennsylvanians when it comes to things like flood mitigation. These 3 steps will help us take a regional and forward-thinking approach to mitigating the dangers of climate change. And they will provide a blueprint for further action to mitigate the effects of climate change on Pennsylvania's communities. Because this is, it's a necessary step. It's only a first step. And there's going to be more that has to be done to protect Pennsylvanians, but this is a good place to start. So I want to thank both Senator Williams and Leader-elect McClinton for joining me today to highlight the importance of this issue. And I urge Republican leaders in the General Assembly to join all of us in this fight to protect Pennsylvanians all across Pennsylvania, in every community, to address the issues that we're all facing that are threatening our homes and our businesses and our families. Climate change is an urgent issue, and Pennsylvanians cannot afford to wait any longer. We need to work together to make sure that Pennsylvania has the tools it needs to protect residents, businesses, and critical infrastructure in the face of these increasingly dangerous and costly severe weather events. Thank you, and now I'm proud to turn this over to the Director of the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency, Randy Padfield. Director Padfield.
Thank you, Governor Wolf. I'm pleased to be here today with Governor Wolf, Senator Williams, Leader-elect McClinton, and Secretary Davin to discuss flood mitigation and the role of the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency. The role that the agency plays in assisting individuals and municipalities before, during, and after flooding events is critical. Unfortunately, we've seen all too often the devastating effects of flooding across the Commonwealth and the impacts it has had on communities, businesses, families, and individuals. Flooding is the most significant natural disaster that affects the state on a repeated basis, whether it be flash flooding or riverine flooding. As you've heard the governor and Senator Williams talk about it, we've seen more flash flooding recently than we've ever seen before. And the statistics show that it is increasing yearly. This continues to result in millions of dollars of damage to businesses, public infrastructure, and individual properties annually, and disrupts the lives of many on a regular and repeated basis. Many of these flooding events are fall below the federal thresholds, as you heard, for assistance because they are localized, which impacts the support that is available for individuals to effectively recover. Even with federal support through a major disaster declaration, those affected are never made whole, and in most circumstances face a long road to recovery. The locations may change, but we've heard the stories far too often from far too many individuals across the state, such as those in Eastwick and the areas of Darby and the southeast portion of the state, especially after Tropical Storm Isaias. While our agency is most known for its roles during and after disasters, the most impactful role is before disasters even occur, through an emphasis on understanding the hazards, applying smart building and development principles and practices that are designed with community resilience in mind, and implementing effective hazard mitigation measures that we're talking about today. As the governor discussed in his remarks, if we understand the factors that contribute to the increased flooding potential in the Commonwealth, such as changes in the weather patterns and climate change, and increase in intense precipitation events, we can take proactive steps to either completely prevent or significantly lessen the impacts of future events. Building communities and infrastructure that are more resilient to future disasters requires local leaders to enact comprehensive local land use planning, enforcement, and zoning initiatives that take into account that our communities are not silos and disasters do not recognize jurisdictional boundaries. All of these initiatives provide significant returns on investment for future generations. Most of these hazard mitigation activities that we talk about provide anywhere from $4 to $7 in mitigation procedures in the future. So depending on what we're talking about, there is a significant return on investment and decreasing the impacts of future disasters. All of these are in our collective control before a disaster or emergency ever strikes. Many of the repeated flooding situations that we see throughout the Commonwealth result from an evolution of factors over time, such as changes in weather and climate patterns, continued land development and construction contributing to more impervious area and thus runoff, and lack of available funding to update ailing infrastructure or effectively address hazard mitigation needs. On a regular basis, we have many more hazard mitigation projects than we ever have funding to be able to complete all of them. Many of these factors are known, and most are within our collective control. It just takes a comprehensive approach to effectively address them in a proactive nature. Through FEMA's Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, which is called their BRIC program, a significant amount of federal funding will be available in the future to states to address hazard mitigation and resiliency projects. This increased funding will allow for more complex and larger projects than ever before. However, we need to have a good foundation in place in the Commonwealth to compete for the much-needed funding to benefit our citizens. That all starts with effectively addressing the factors that are under our control, as the governor has outlined here today. It is truly imperative that we do this so current and future generations will not have to experience the repeated cycle of impact and loss from flooding. Now I'd like to turn the podium over, or virtually turn the podium over, to my colleague from the Department of Community and Economic Development, Secretary Dennis Davin.
Thank you so much, Director Padfield. Over the past 10 months, we've been occupied by efforts to contain the spread of COVID-19 across our Commonwealth, a pandemic that has impacted countless lives and livelihoods. But today we're here to talk about another danger, and that's the effects posed by climate change. With projections calling for increased precipitation over the years to come, it's critical that we lay the groundwork to implement flood hazard mitigation efforts and protect our communities and our businesses. The work we do today will better prepare us for not only the immediate impact of severe storms and flooding, but also the long-term recovery that follows. As weather conditions continue to change, major storms and flooding have devastated homes and businesses in counties across the state. These are spaces that are safe to us, our homes, our family and neighbors' homes, our favorite small businesses, our places of employment. These are our lives and our livelihoods. This administration has consistently advocated for infrastructure improvements that would better position our state when we are inevitably faced with extreme weather. And because of the short durations of most storms impeding our ability to request federal disaster aid assistance, we need to better prepare for and respond to changing weather patterns. DCED is willing and able to do whatever it takes, working in partnership with our sister agencies to strengthen our ability to prepare and respond when severe weather strikes. Our state planning board will commit to identifying tangible goals and strategic investment principles that can be implemented across the administration to promote smart, best practices to protect our communities and businesses. The board, which is made up of 25 members, including citizens, legislators, and State Department heads, including studies demographic, economic, and development trends and prepares strategic plans for the Commonwealth. The board works with DCED to prepare the state land use and growth management report every 5 years. The report studies development patterns and local government land use planning and makes recommendations for state agency action, regulations, and programs. We're ready to go to work because that's what we at DCED do. We focus on the well-being of Pennsylvania's businesses and Pennsylvania's communities. We look forward to working collaboratively to enhance Pennsylvania's storm preparedness capabilities across all 67 counties, along with our colleagues in the legislature and the rest of the Wolf administration. Quite simply, by planning today, we can be prepared tomorrow. So thank you, and I'll turn it back to Governor Wolf to take on-topic questions. Governor?
Thanks very much, Secretary Davin.
Good afternoon. First up, we have Justin Schweitzer from PLS Reporter, followed by Tyler Pratt from WLVR. Justin, you should be able to unmute and ask your question. Thank you.
Hi, Governor. As you mentioned earlier, you've sought a lot of climate change and infrastructure-related proposals over your 2 terms as governor, and there really hasn't been a lot of buy-in from Republican leaders in the legislature. I was just curious if you could expand a little bit on, how that's hindered Pennsylvania's efforts to combat climate change. I mean, do you see the state, behind in its efforts, to address climate change because of that? Really just wanted to see if you could expand upon that.
Yeah, well, thanks, Justin. I think it's a good question. The issue with Restore Pennsylvania was really that Pennsylvania has not been able to do much, if anything, for its citizens who have suffered from the consequences of climate change. And these short duration storms are a great example. As you recall, over just the short time of my administration, 6 years, we've had major incidents all across the state, out in Allegheny County, up in Lycoming County, in Schuylkill County, in York County, in Philadelphia County. And there's one theme that seemed to work throughout, and that is that no one incident, as devastating as it was to a lot of people in these small communities, they didn't create enough damage to reach the, $17-18 million threshold for the federal relief. And Pennsylvania had no relief. So that was a problem. So I went back and said, what can we do to address this issue, to help these folks in these rural and urban communities who are facing trouble and have financial burdens now imposed on them by these changes, by climate change. And there's no federal funding available because of the way they have the formula. Well, we had no money in Pennsylvania. So my next question was, do we have anything we can do to prevent this stuff from happening? We don't have anything there either, or we have very few things that we can do. And that's where I proposed my Restore Pennsylvania. But again, it came from the frustration that I think, and what I saw was a frustration that was felt by, again, Republicans and Democrats, people who represented rural and urban areas, west and east, that all over Pennsylvania were facing this new reality that we have these severe storms that affects small portions of our geography that don't rise to the level of the dollars, the thresholds that the federal government requires. And we have nothing that we can do here in Pennsylvania. So I'm trying to do something. And in the absence of the funding, which has been the problem, I don't think there's anybody who disagrees that we have a problem. The funding is the issue. Here are some things we can do that don't require funding. We already have the Pennsylvania Planning Board. We already have these folks doing the work to try to look at broad issues in Pennsylvania. And I think that's what we're all trying to do here. And as Director Padfield pointed out, some of the things that we can do here might actually help us to free up more federal funds because we're actually doing this together. None of this, however, gets back, Justin, to your question, your point, to what we really need is to make sure that we put the prevention efforts here on a sure financial footing. And that's something that I will continue to work with the General Assembly to figure out how to do.
I think Senator Williams may have wanted to comment as well. Is that correct, Senator?
Yes, thank you. I want to put a specific period at the end of a question, and that was, are we behind? We're not behind. We are woefully behind, and dangerously behind when it comes to public safety, private homes, businesses. The manner and the pattern which we have persisted upon will undermine the very value of the Commonwealth itself. There's a new administration coming in Washington, D.C. I hope that their term, as ours is starting over again, will be able to succeed in compromising and understanding this is not a political issue. This is a human issue. It's tragic because some people want to argue whether climate change exists or not, while someone's home is literally falling apart because of the damage consistently across Pennsylvania. So I don't really care what the term is. What we are clear about is that Pennsylvania should be able to get out of its way, a new term come in, Democrats and Republicans work with the governor and administration that recognizes farmers, suburbanites, and people who live in cities are all at wit's end about us not getting things done that affect their daily lives. So this is no longer a political statement about climate change. This is a real statement about the consequence of weather, its damages, and our inability to help citizens privately because we simply won't do what they've asked us to do, and that is work together to find funding relief that the governor has proposed, which will not be a tax or a burden, but frankly, new revenue to a long-standing problem, which will put us further behind if we don't do something about it. So again, I want to thank the governor for his leadership in this area, and I plead with my colleagues, Democrat and Republican, that allow us to move forward in this space.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for your question, Justin. Next up, we have Tyler Pratt from WLVR, followed by Stephen Novak from Lehigh Valley Live. And Tyler, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, thank you. My question is for the governor. Governor Wolf, thank you so much for having this press conference today and addressing this important topic. However, it does fall on a dark day in the Commonwealth with a record number of COVID deaths, hospitalizations, and nearly record number of new cases. Do you have any plans to change your mitigation efforts or enact shutdown orders? I mean, given your health professionals are anticipating it's going to get worse. Thank you.
I don't have any plans at this point. We'll continue to meet with members of the General Assembly and work together to figure out how we address this. I think what you just said is absolutely true and is recognized quite widely that our healthcare systems, while we're all in a different place than we were 8 months ago back in March, we have a lot more knowledge. We have a lot more personal protective equipment. Our hospitals know more about the therapies, and we have vaccines on the way. But there is no question that what you just said is true, that we are seeing a violent upsurge in cases, in deaths, in hospitalizations, things that really are reason for alarm. So we have to figure out what we're going to do about this. And again, this comes down to a responsibility that all Pennsylvanians share. We can do things in a top-down fashion, but the basic solution here is for 13 million Pennsylvanians to do basic, simple things. Wear a mask, practice social distancing. If you don't have to go out, don't go out. So all those things are in place. We have the stay-at-home advisory, telework when you can. and indoor and outdoor restrictions. The real solution to this is for the people of Pennsylvania, all of us, to work together to protect each other and keep each other safe. And I'll keep working with the General Assembly to make sure that we all work together to do that.
Thank you. I believe we may have lost Stephen Novak from Lehigh Valley Live. So I'm going to move on to Ed Russo from CBS 21. And you should be able to unmute in just one moment here, unless you may have also dropped off. I think we also may have lost Ed from CBS 21. If that is the case, I'm going to move to Rachel McDevitt from State Impact and WITF. You should be able to unmute, Rachel.
Hi, yeah, thank you. So is there a timeline for these recommendations, and then how the strategic investments can be deployed?
Well, the timeline actually is we're moving immediately to we've already started talking with the state board, which is in the Department of Community and Economic Development, and so that's already moving forward. If the question is about what impact their recommendations will have on future investment dollars, that has yet to be worked out, but getting to work on that immediately. So this is something that we can do immediately. It basically lays out the game plan for how we're going to mitigate the reality of climate change in Pennsylvania. And it's something that I think all Pennsylvanians have a shared vested interest in. We have a stake in making sure we do this right. So I'm not waiting for anything else to happen. This is going to start immediately.
Thank you. But when can people in these communities, I mean, we've mentioned several communities that were hit hard in 2018. I mean, when would they see some tangible benefits? I know we don't know, when the next storm will come, but when could they maybe see some improvements in their communities that they could feel assured that maybe the next time they have some more protection?
Yeah, I think that's the essential question. Again, as I said, a couple of years ago when I went around the state and saw all the devastation that you're talking about and that we're going to have more of, I laid out a plan. And the plan is not just to say, oh, this is terrible, let's do something. It was, let's raise money. And my plan was a plan to raise $4.5 billion. I mean, that's the magnitude of money we're talking about to make the investments we have to make to prevent the kind of flooding that creates the devastation that I saw and that we can see and will happen again the next time we have these storms. The storms that affected the areas that Senator Williams and Leader-elect McClinton represent, that happened. And again, I'll let Director Padfield talk about that. But the problem there and the problem we had in these localized floods that happen all across the Commonwealth time and time again, we don't have enough damage to go to the federal government and say, we need your help. Give us the money we need to make these folks whole. And until the state comes up with something to address these issues that arise right now, these real issues that affect real families in Pennsylvania, until we figure out how to fund that stuff, the only thing we're going to be able to do is shrug our shoulders and say, yeah, that's terrible, I really feel for you. But there's nothing that we here in Pennsylvania or in Washington can do. Director Padfield, you want to talk a little more about that?
Sure, thank you. So I think that's a good question, and I think the challenge that we have, so we have continuing or ongoing hazard mitigation projects. So every year we get funding to be able to fund a certain amount of hazard mitigation projects, and we actually have a way to be able to take a look at those projects and to be able to kind of rank those projects. We always have more projects than we ever have funding. The BRIC program that I was talking about actually gives us the availability of having more funding in the future, which is a significant game changer. But like we said, we have to have actually the foundation in place to be able to make sure that we are maximally competitive to be able to get those funds. But it's really a twofold question. So the challenge is really going back and taking a look at correcting issues where we know that we have problems, such as Eastwick and Darby and those areas where we have repeated flooding. So we really look at hazard mitigation there, but also the other side of this, and the governor talked about this as well, is really future building to make sure that we're building with an eye towards resiliency. to be able to make sure that we have the things in place. We're using proper zoning and land use, and we're not transferring or potentially exacerbating other issues in other jurisdictions. And I think that's really key. And Senator Williams hit on this as well, is that unfortunately we have ailing infrastructure across the state. And the amount of money that is available to be able to deal with that from a hazard mitigation perspective is extremely minimal when you look at the number of projects that we have. So it's really key that we really take a look at it from a two-pronged approach. Number one is going back and correcting the issues, especially in those areas where we know we have problems, but also taking a look at anything in the future that we're doing and working with Secretary Davin and DCED to make sure that if we're funding projects, they are projects that have resiliency in mind when we take a look at the construction features and the land use and those types of things.
Thank you, Director Padfield, and thank you for your question, Rachel. Next up, we have Brian McCrone from NBC 10, and following Brian will be our last question of the day from Jim Melwart at KYW. So you should be able to unmute, Brian.
Thank you, Governor. I have a two-point question. On the proactive level, I want to talk to you a little bit about preventative steps. So what does your administration have in plans to expand clean energy like solar and wind in Pennsylvania, where the state's lagging a lot of other states in both of those sectors? And also, how does that work in tangent with getting Pennsylvania into RGGI? And how optimistic are you that that can happen with the GOP-controlled legislature?
Well, let me take the second part first, and I'm hoping that I'll remember what the first question was. But the second part, we already have legislation in place. Some time ago, the General Assembly passed clean air, clean water legislation that allows us to do things like join the regional greenhouse gas initiative. So we have been going through the regulatory process internally and the Environmental Review Board, and we're confident that within the next year or so we can actually join the regional greenhouse gas initiative. That, as you know, will assess a price on externalities that have to do with things like carbon in the air, things that will actually make solar and wind more economically viable. So that's a big step, I think, in the direction of moving toward wind and solar. I think another big thing that I've already done is close the borders, as you know, and said that in the past, you could bring your solar energy to satisfy whatever portfolio standards you had from other states. Now you can't do that. We have to develop that internally, so it's going to mean more jobs for Pennsylvania, and I think a much more of a vested interest in moving forward quickly with solar and wind. We need to get to that sustainable energy future, and I think all of us would love to be able just to snap our fingers, wave a magic wand, and get there. Unfortunately, we can't do that. So everything we need to do is figure out how to make the transition as smooth and seamless as we possibly can, and make it as fast as we can. So I'm focused on that. You mentioned some of the things that I'm doing, and we will continue to work in that direction.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you for your question, Brian. Our last question today is from Jim Melwart from KYW News Radio. You should be able to unmute.
Sort of following up on Justin's question, and Senator Williams addressed it, but more specifically with the phrase climate change being, like it or not, so politically charged, is there concern that the needed updates or changes in especially Darby and Eastwick and the images that we saw a few months ago, that they get hung up over the politics of the phrase?
Yeah, let me first of all apologize to Brian for forgetting the first part of the question. So I'll make sure you get an answer to that. But yeah, this is really, I think, an important issue. We have done such a fine job across this political spectrum of making political, philosophical arguments and turning these things into anything but a practical problem. The truth is that climate change is not an ideological issue. It's not something that is partisan. It's real. When you go to a small community in Lycoming County and see the devastation that individual families have suffered because a local stream has overflowed and basically destroyed their home, that's not partisan issue. It's not an abstraction. It's a real thing. And the real thing is that there's nothing anybody right now can do about it except shrug our shoulders. So I think what we've got to do, and thank you for bringing this up, is remind ourselves that while some of these things have become so politicized in this intensely politicized era, we got to remember that these are real lives and real homes and real communities that are being affected by our lack of action. And we need to do something, and we need to stop talking about it. We need to stop posturing. We need to actually do something, and that's what I'm trying to do here. Let's start this process by developing the plan. This is what we can do now without the funding, and start so that when and if funding finally does come, and we finally get beyond this sterile ideological debate that we're going through about things like climate change and the direction of the environment, we need to do something about these folks whose families and lives are being devastated. And that's pure and simple what we need to do.